Our field reporters at TYT Politics have put together a video showing what Trump has managed to achieve in his agenda during his first 100 days. Now, of course, there has been a lot of emphasis on his failures, things that he wanted to do but didn't manage to do. But while we're distracted by his crazy behavior, he has managed to negatively impact the lives of many Americans. Take a look.
The president issued a memorandum reestablishing the Mexico City policy, stating that the United States will end the use of taxpayer dollars to fund abortions overseas. It is extreme.
The president himself called it a ban.
I understand.
Is he confused or you can?
No, I'm not confused. Iran's additional hostile actions that it took against our Navy vessel are ones that we are not going to sit by and take.
Yes.
So, thank you. Sorry. Yes.
So this is a sneak peek of the video, which will be posted in full, like the entire video on youtube.com/TYTpolitics. So we wanted to give you guys a quick look at what they're working on. And it's a difficult video to watch, especially when you are reminded of how much damage he's been able to do in such a short period of time.
I think you're right to focus on the fact that the nation and the mainstream media is distracted by he was unable to roll back Obamacare. He's unable even to get really a clean launch on tax revisions. And so you begin to talk about his failed presidency. But the truth is the changes, and they are obscene, are going right out the front door of the White House. And we didn't even mention what he's doing to the environment. You know, in that first week, he rolled back a bunch of environmental standards that involve the dumping of poisons into waterways, and totally unchecked, I mean, with utter impunity. So I think that
the companies will police themselves, Mark.
Yeah, exactly. Thankfully, those corporations are responsible.
Yeah. As always, sort of, and I don't blame the mainstream media so much as blaming us, all of us. This is what we've become interested in. It's what I've become interested in to some extent. I like to talk about the politics of it during a actual race for the White House or a congressional race but I think this is a little unnecessary. Hang on, it's just that seems. That was a bit much. I didn't realize that.
A little pretentious.
Yeah. Can't even be bothered to put my collar down. I have so much going on.
Just rustled in. Right.
Yeah. But the measurement of whether Trump has succeeded in his 100 days is totally measured in the way the stories are covered in general, at least on television.
Right.
By whether he succeeded in fulfilling the things that he said he would do. So you measure it by, I'm going to accomplish A, B, C, D, 25 things, and he only accomplished 1.5, he's a failure. That's politics. Like, it doesn't really matter whether he accomplished the things he said. The only thing that matters now, when the race is over, is policy. Politics matter as far as undermining him. That's why I would oppose literally everything he did, even if I agreed with it. He must be weakened politically. That matters. But that is also a story about policy. My policy is to weaken him politically. The policy goes on, the policy marches on, and in those executive orders, which he literally sends out a press release, Obama issued 18 executive orders, I issued 56.
Yeah.
After the right criticizes Obama for issuing executive orders. But those executive orders, that's what matters, that's what should be covered. In a sense, I would say, Sean Hannity and Lou Dobbs both went on Fox television and said Trump has pretty much been perfect for 100 days. So there is an argument to make if what you want is him to accomplish and do the kind of presidency, manage the kind of White House that he said he'd run. He is. He is. The stuff that required help from others, we knew he'd fail at because he's incompetent at working with other people. So we decide that he is a failure because he didn't meet this list. That's a political list. the policy, he's effective. He is an effective president at undermining democracy and undermining the environment, at undermining voter rights, at undermining any number of things that so skillfully were put together by our reporters.
What I also think is interesting is his strategy of just kind of flooding the news cycle day in and day out with so much that it's hard for anyone to hold him accountable for everything, right? And so the dentist being able to, dump mercury without any oversight, without them being checked on that. I mean, quite honestly, I didn't really know much about that story because that was a minor story compared to everything else that he's been doing.
It was a big story for 6 hours on Tuesday on the 47th day of his presidency.
But he's busy talking shit to North Korea, so
and then Sean Spicer said, "Hey, Hitler didn't gas anybody," And
it's just and then that's the thing. The media loves to focus on the rhetoric because that's red meat. That'll get the clicks, that will make the headlines, that'll get people to pay attention. But in essence, even though those offensive words and statements by Sean Spicer or other members of Trump's administration, do get under people's skin, and I understand people want to hear about it, it doesn't actually affect people's lives as much as the mercury in the environment and things like that. And so, look. It's hard for me personally to not feel like I'm failing at my job because I can't keep up.
That's right, I can't keep, and we fall victim to it. We talk when Sean Spicer says he didn't gas his, you're like, what the, it's exactly what he does. When Trump said, I don't know whether you guys covered it, I couldn't play it enough. He's reading the prompter, he's so dim-witted. Like, I know he knows the word is Nazi, but when he sees it on a prompter and goes Nazi, that's because he doesn't read.
Sure.
People who don't read don't see that, and then so are they Nazi. Right, that's Nazi. Of course, that's how you say it, right? And I get fascinated by that. I love it. The Jimmy Kimmel video is one of the greatest videos I've ever seen of Trump. You seen this yet?
No, I haven't seen it.
Great.
He moves stuff around because he's got OCD. Yeah. He's like, and also sometimes it's this. It'll be his drink, but he doesn't want it in front, so he's like, he just pushes it in front of the guy next to him. And I mean, it's like 17 things. And Kimmel said one of their TV watchers found it, and it's brilliant. And
I think that might be a tactic and a strategy because when I did speech and debate, the speech coach told us that when you go into the room, you want to dominate that room.
Totally.
And one way that you do so, one way that you show strength is you start moving furniture around to make the environment comfortable for yourself.
It's what he's doing.
And so,
and it's funny because no matter how close his glass of water or papers are, he moves it forward, right? He sits down and he's like, okay, how you doing? Move that there, move that there. He's just moving stuff. But even when it's well in front of him, if this were the front of the desk, even if it's already there, he still.
I didn't realize that. So he pushes stuff further away.
He pushes further away, and then a couple times he took the glass and he was just like, pushed it in front of the other guy.
Wild.
It's really weird.
I didn't know that wrinkle. But you know something, Anna? There's a lot of this where we give Trump credit for being sort of the architect of something that is deliberately designed to take control of the room. Now, it may be, and this whole thing, I didn't know about it. So maybe this pushing of the drink or moving papers, and maybe that is effective, and he learned that somewhere from his dad, But I think he's incompetent on a level that we've never seen before. Right. I don't give him credit for being the architect or choreographer of anything. I think he's utterly inept, and I mean that extends to everything. So I think ascribing any strategy to virtually anything he's doing is a mistake.
Except he has undeniable some political skill. Like it is not a political skill that we have previously championed, but he has political skill. He is able to communicate, do what Reagan did, and Clinton to some extent, which is bypass the media and just reach the voter, right? The manner he has of talking, that manner that to you and to me and to Anna reflects incompetence to a degree we cannot fathom, has managed to work to some degree, whether he has it accidentally. I mean, it's what made him an effective host of The Apprentice. It's why when the first season of The Apprentice, I watched 4 episodes and I was like, this is a neat idea. And this Trump sort of kind of fun. He just sort of, and I remember telling Michael, sure, like, hey, it's kind of fun. And that's when Michael said, that's the worst guy in America. I won't watch that show, want anything to do with him. Don't fall for it. He's the worst person you've ever seen.
Well,
and I was like, Jesus, okay, whatever, overreacting, Michael. And then it turned out, nope, yeah.
Michael was right.
Yeah, Lou Dobbs and Sean Hannity think he's crushing it. That doesn't, they're not just saying that, they actually believe it, because this list of things that TYT Politics has, they think
that's what they wanted. Yeah,
sure.
That's right.
Great work, despite an obstructionist Democrats and weak Republicans in their mind. He's gotten all these things done. He said he was going to do this. He was going to shrink government. He was going to let the private sector dominate, and that is precisely what he's done. I read this somewhere, I think on Twitter. I'm just curious, and maybe I'm way off base and I misinterpreted. I didn't do enough reading into it. I read his Wikipedia page on it, so I might be. But every time they cut funding internationally for abortion, everyone ought to remind him that the country in the world with the most liberal abortion policy is Israel, which is the country that the right wants to give most of its money to. So it just strikes me as interesting that we're comfortable giving money to Israel and comfortable with Israeli abortions, but yet somehow we can't let poor Mexicans have abortions.
Well, I'm glad you
I
mentioned
actually
it.
did not know that.
It's pretty interesting, and according to Wikipedia, it's true.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned abortion, because it's the coda to all of this, which is that the religious right, in addition to Sean Hannity and Lou Dobbs, as Ben says, the religious right is very happy with Donald Trump. I mean, the attack on Planned Parenthood, the successful attack on Planned Parenthood, and the successful placement of a Supreme Court justice who will clearly work against a woman's right to choose. These are things that are victories for the far right, as represented by the Holy Rollers.
Yeah.
So they're happy. And last thing, and then I'll shut up. Ben, I'm in mentioning the contradictions. I just thought, boy, you can put it in the same basket of contradictions. The declaration of a fight on terrorism, but then of course the funding and totally rolling around in bed with Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. Our journalism drive is almost over. It ends in Trump's first 100 days. We need to hire more reporters and more watchdogs. Let's do that right now at tytnetwork.com/go.